The Rurik dynasty or Rurikids was a dynasty founded by the Varangian prince Rurik, who established himself in Novgorod around the year 862 AD. The Rurikids were the ruling dynasty of Kievan Rus, as well as the successor principalities of Galicia-Volhynia, Chernigov, Vladimir-Suzdal, and the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and the founders of the Tsardom of Russia. They ruled until 1598 and the time of troubles, following which they were succeeded by the Romanoversus They, one of Europe's oldest royal houses, with numerous existing cadet branches. As a ruling dynasty, the Rurik dynasty held its own in some part of Russia for a total of 21 generations in male line succession. From Rurik to Feodor I of Russia, a period of more than 700 years. Origins. The Rurikid dynasty was founded in 862 by Rurik, a Varangian prince. Folk history tells of the Finnic and Slavic tribes in the area calling on the Varangians, to the Rus, the Chud, the Slovenes, the Krivichi and the Ves said, "Our land is vast and abundant, but there is no order in it. Come and reign as princes and have authority over us." 3 brothers came with their kin, and all the Rus in response to this invitation. Rurik set up rule in Novgorod, giving more provincial towns to his brothers. There is some ambiguity even in the primary chronicle about the specifics of the story. Hence the paradoxical statement, "The people of Novgorod are of Varangian stock, for formerly they were Slovenes." However, archaeological evidence such as Frankish swords, a sword sharper and a tortoise-shell brooch in the area suggest that there was, in fact, a Scandinavian population during the 10th century at the latest. The Rurikid dynasty DNA project, a family tree and a commercial genetic genealogy company, reports that DNA testing of the descendants of Rurikids suggests the non-Slavic origin. History of the dynasty. Rurik and his brothers founded a state that later historians called Kievan Rus. By the middle of the 12th century, Kievan Rus had dissolved into independent principalities, each ruled by different branches of the Rurik dynasty. The dynasty followed agnatic seniority and the Izhgoy principle. The Rurik dynasty underwent a major schism after the death of Yaroslav the Wise in 1054, dividing into 3 branches on the basis of descent from 3 successive ruling head princes, Izyaslav, Sviatoslav, and Vsevolod. In addition, a line of Polotsk princes assimilated themselves with the princes of Lithuania. In the 10th century, the Council of Lubeck made some amendments to a succession rule and divided Ruthenia into several autonomous principalities that had equal rights to obtain the Kiev throne. Vsevolod's line eventually became better known as the Monomakovichi and was the predominant one. The line of Sviatoslav later became known as Olegovichi and often laid claim to the lands of Chernigov and Severia. The Izyaslavichi, who ruled Turov and Volhynia, were eventually replaced by a Monomakovichi branch. The Rurikid dynasty attempted to impose on the highly diverse polity the integrative concept of Russkaya Zemlya and the unifying notion of a Rus people. But Kievan Rus was never really a unified polity. It was a loosely bound, ill-defined, and heterogeneous conglomeration of lands and cities inhabited by tribes and populous groups whose loyalties were primarily territorial. This caused the Rurik dynasty to effectively dissolve into several sub-dynasties ruling smaller states in the 10th and 11th centuries. These were the Olgoviches of Severia, who ruled in Chernigov, Yureyeviches, who controlled Vladimir-Suzdal, and Roman Romanoversus in Galicia-Volhynia, descendants of Sviatoslav II of Kiev. The Olgaviches descended from Oleg of Chernigov, a son of Sviatoslav II of Kiev and grandson of Yaroslav the Wise. They continued to rule until the early 14th century, when they were torn apart by the emerging Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Grand Duchy of Moscow. The line continued through Oleg's son Vsevolod II of Kiev, grandson Sviatoslav III of Kiev, great-grandson Vsevolod IV of Kiev, and great-great-grandson Michael of Chernigov, from whose sons the extant lines of the Oligoviches are descended, including the Masalsky, Gorchakov, Baryutinsky, Volkonsky and Obolensky, including Rybnin. Descendants of Vsevolod I of Kiev. Vsevolod I of Kiev was the father of Vladimir II Monomach, giving rise to the name Monomach for his progeny. Two of Vladimir II's sons were Mstislav I of Kiev and Untitled Rurikids. The Romanoversus were the line of Roman the Great, descended from Mstislav I of Kiev through his son Izyaslav II of Kiev and his grandson Mstislav II of Kiev, father of Roman the Great, the older Monomachovichi line that ruled Principality of Volhynia. They were eventually crowned kings of Galicia and Volhynia and ruled until 1323. Romanoversus displaced the older line of Izyaslavichi from Tora and Volhynia, as well as Rostislavichi from Galicia. The last were two brothers of Romanoversus, Andrei and Lev II, who ruled jointly and were slain trying to repel Mongol incursions. The Polish king, Vladislav I the Elbow High, in his letter to the Pope wrote with regret, "The two last Ruthenian kings, that had been firm shields for Poland from the Tartars, left this world, and after their death Poland is directly under Tartar threat, losing their leadership role." Rurikids, however, continued to play a vital role in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the later Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Most notably, the Ostrogsky family held the title of Grand Hetman of Lithuania and strove to preserve the Ruthenian language and Eastern Orthodoxy in this part of Europe. It is thought that the Drusk and related princely families may also descend from Roman the Great. The Rostislaviches were the line of Rostislav I of Kiev, another son of Mstislav I of Kiev, who was Prince of Smolensk and a progenitor of the lines descending from the princes of Smolensk and Yaroslavl. The Yuryeviches were founded by Untitled Rurikids, the founder of Moscow, and spread vastly in the northeast. Yuri's son Vsevolod the Bignest was Prince of Vladimir-Suzdal, a precursor state to the Grand Principality of Moscow and thus of the Russian Empire. Vsevolod's son Constantine of Rostov was Prince of Rostov and the progenitor of various Rostov princely lines. Another son, Ivan Vsevolodich, was Prince of Starodub and progenitor of a number of extant lines, most notably the Gagarin line. Vsevolod's son Yaroslav II of Vladimir was the father of Alexander Nevsky, whose son Daniel of Moscow sired the ruling House of Moscow until the end of the 16th century. Beginning with the reign of Ivan the Terrible, the Muscovite branch used the title Tsar of all Russia and ruled over the Tsardom of Russia. The death in 1598 of Tsar Feodor I ended the rule of the Rurik dynasty. The dynasty was briefly revived in the person of Vasily IV of Russia, a descendant of Shuisky line of the Rurik dynasty, but he died without issue. The unstable period known as the Time of Troubles succeeded Fyodor's death and lasted until 1613. In that year, Mikhail I ascended the throne, founding the Romanov dynasty that would rule until 1762, and as Holstein Gottorp Romanov until the revolutions of 1917. Tsar Mikhail's first wife, Maria Dolgorukova was of Rurikid stock, but the marriage produced no children. Emperor Peter III in 1762 brought fresh Rurikid blood to the Romanovs. He and his wife Catherine the Great both descended from the Rurik dynasty, through her maternal grandfather Christian August of Holstein-Gottorp. Historian Vasily Tatishchev and filmmaker Jacques Tati also descended from Rurik. Trade. In the early days of the Rurikid dynasty, the Kievan Rus mainly traded with other tribes in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia. There was little need for complex social structures to carry out these exchanges in the forest north of the steppes, so long as the entrepreneurs operated in small numbers and kept to the north. They did not catch the attention of observers or writers. The Rus also had strong trading ties to Byzantium, particularly in the early 900s, as treaties in 911 and 944 indicate. These treaties deal with the treatment of runaway Byzantine slaves and limitations on the amounts of certain commodities such as silk that could be bought from Byzantium. The Rus used log rafts floated down the Dnieper River by Slavic tribes for the transport of goods, particularly slaves, to Byzantium. Skirmish with Byzantium. One of the largest military accomplishments of the Rurikid dynasty was the attack on Byzantium in 960. Pilgrims of the Rus had been making the journey from Kiev to Constantinople for many years, and Constantine Porphyrogenitus, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, believed that this gave them significant information about the arduous parts of the journey and where travelers were most at risk, as would be pertinent for an invasion. This route took travelers through domain of the Pechenegs, journeying mostly by river. In June 941, the Rus staged a naval ambush on Byzantine forces, making up for the smaller numbers with small, maneuverable boats. Interestingly, these boats were ill-equipped for the transportation of large quantities of treasure, suggesting that looting was not the goal. The raid was led, according to the primary chronicle, by a king called Igor. 3 years later, the Treaty of 944 stated that all ships approaching Byzantium must be preceded by a letter from the Rurikid prince stating the number of ships and assuring the peaceful intent. This not only indicates fear of another surprise attack, but an increased Kievan presence in the Black Sea. Legacy. Russian and Ukrainian historians have debated for many years about the legacy of the Rurikid dynasty. The Russian view, resting largely on religious, ecclesiastical and historical ideological claims and on political juridical theories formulated in Moscow between the 1330s and the late 1850s, and views the Principality of Moscow as the sole heir to the Kievan Rus civilization. The Ukrainian view came into being somewhat later, between the 1840s and the end of the 1930s, and views the Ukrainian descendants of the Rurikid dynasty as its only true successors. The Soviet theory allotted equal rights to the Kievan inheritance to the three Slavic peoples, that is, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Belarusians. Genetic studies of Rurikids. According to the family tree in a Rurikid dynasty DNA project, Rurik appears to have belonged to Y DNA haplogroup N1C1, based on testing of his modern male line descendants. Further genetic studies seem to indicate the existence of two major haplogroups among modern Rurikids. The descendants of Vladimir II monomic and some others are of N1C1 group, while the descendants of a junior prince from the branch of Oleg I of Chernigov and some others are of R1A and R1B haplogroups. Branches. Monomicovici, princes of Pereyaslavici of monomic princes of Volhynia, kings of Rus. Uryavici, princes of Vladimir-Suzdal, grand princes of Moscow. Rostislavici, princes of Smolensk. Rostislavichi of Halych, princes of Halych; Olgavichi, princes of Chernigov; Izyaslavichi of Polotsk, princes of Polotsk; Izyaslavichi of Turov, princes of Turov and Volhynia. Family tree. Main line. Vladimir's Czech wives. Vladimir's other wives. From Vladimir the Great to Yuri I long arm. Vladimir the Great. Jaroslav the Wise, son of Vladimir the Rurikids. Vsevolod I of Kiev, son of Yaroslav the Wise. Vladimir II Monomach, son of Vsevolod I of Kiev. Yuri I Dolgoruki, i.e. Yuri Longarm. The lineage from Yuri I Longarm onwards is given in the table below. Yuri the Longarm onwards. The following image shows the descent of the leading of the Rurikids, being the descendants of Vladimir II Monomach through his sixth son Yuri Dolgoruki, known as Yuri I and Yuri Longarm. Gallery.